So good morning to everyone, and a particular thanks to Jonathan. I'm not sure if, Jonathan, you might be the first person to take the expert seat twice around. I'm not sure. I know the team will correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you do. I'm getting nods, so I think you do hold that honour. So thank you very much for that. As I think everybody knows, the format for these events is that our expert, and I always build them up as a real expert, you know, and then we judge whether they've sort of lived up to that or not when we provide our scores. So I know Jonathan will live up to it. So we invite our expert to speak, to give a presentation. I don't think Jonathan is using slides, but he is going to give us an update on where the LEPR, the Local Enterprise Partnership Coast to Capital are in terms, well, I'm not sure exactly what he is covering, to be honest with you, but I'm sure he will cover the sort of plans in terms of supporting the economy and supporting business through the recovery and beyond. And then it normally works out that we have plenty of time for a good sort of comment, question and answer session. And I'm sure that'll be the case today. So I'm looking at the numbers. I think I would like to do, can we make it a very quick introduction? So just name and company or organization, and then we can whip through it. But there are some people who haven't been with us before, so I do think it's worth doing that. So I'm Jeff Alexander. I'm Chief Executive of Gatwick Diamond Business. And we have Sally Brown, Katie Lyons and Mandy Lloyd from the GDB team. On my screen, we're all sat right at the top, which is where we should be, but might be mixed up on yours. So Jonathan, he will introduce himself in a second. So Nasser, if you could just say quickly, name and, I was going to say rank, name and organization.
Yeah, I rank myself wherever I usually rank myself after a drink or two. It's Nasser from Business Pulse Advisory and Investment Group.
Thanks, Nasser. Julia? You're muted, Julia.
I'm mute. There we go. Julia Dickinson from CGI in Leatherhead. We're a global IT company.
Julia. Louise, with a good background as usual.
Hey everybody, Louise from Sussex Wildlife Trust, looking after all of our corporate partners.
And David.
Hi, David Stanton here from Proactive by Design. We specialise in creativity and proactivity and foresight consulting.
Thanks, David. Simon.
Simon Bland, Head of Economic Prosperity at Reigate and Banstead Borough Council.
And Alison.
Maddie, Head of Community Engagement at Gatwick Airport.
Jeremy's already introduced himself, but he can have another go. Jeremy.
Jeremy Taylor, the Company Connector.
And Tony.
Tony Darton from Sussex Community Foundation. So we raise funds for and give grants to grassroots organisations in Sussex.
And Sally. You're muted, Sally. Sorry, Sally, you're muted.
Here we go. Sally Fish from the Wilkie Group. We are a property and investment company owning 150 acres of land to the east of Gatwick Airport.
Thanks, Sally. Nigel?
Morning all, I'm Nigel Lamb. I'm Chief Executive of Sussex Innovation, which is the business incubator owned by Sussex University.
And Claire?
Hello, I'm Claire Bown. I work for Insert Space. We specialise in market research in the property industry.
Thanks, Claire. And finally, for now at least, Ross.
I'm Ross Sturley, Charlane. I'm a journalist, writer, and used to be a conference organiser, and now I do online events.
Yeah. Okay, Jonathan, I just thought it might be useful for you to have a feel for who your audience is today. And over to you, really.
Thank you very much. Well, it is nice to see so many people I recognise, and it's always nice to see people individually, but actually it's often really even better to have people together in a small group like this. So I'm Jonathan Sharrock, I'm Chief Executive of Coast to Capital, and if I haven't met you already, it's very nice to be introduced. And I'll be honest with you, as I was being honest with Jeff beforehand, we have our AGM next week, which many of you hopefully we'll be coming to. And for me, this is a bit of a sort of intimate warm-up gig before the Glastonbury main stage event that is the AGM. So, you know, I thought I'd do a few acoustic numbers before I get on the pyramid stage on Wednesday. We've got more than 300 people expected at that AGM. So as well as having something to say, it's important to make sure that I say it properly. So this was good. I'm not using any slides today. You'll have to wait till the AGM, but maybe it would be helpful if I just ran through what we've observed through the last 6 months of COVID. It's now nearly 6 months since the lockdown was called, and what has happened to our economy and what we think will happen next in terms of the way business works in the area and the response from government. So there's a certain element of hope, and there's a certain element of expectation. I'll let you judge what the balance is between it. Is that okay, Jeff? Okay.
I said yes.
Yes. So look, obviously I'm talking about the coastal capital area rather than the Gatwick Diamond area, just to remind you of that. So before COVID happened, we already knew that our economy was in a bit of trouble. I think that's, those of you that were involved in the last year's AGM will remember we were gathering an evidence base to submit to government. We were trying to articulate, and I think we succeeded actually in articulating what makes our region. We described the region as complacent. One of the big events of 2019 was me standing up in front of all the local authority leaders and saying we felt the region had approached economic growth complacently in previous years. That was a bit of an experience. And the reason we described it as complacent is that although we have a large economy in the area, although that economy has grown by 2 to 3% on average for the last decade, you know, it's nearly a £60 billion economy in 2018. So in many, many ways, it's really very successful. We were increasingly concerned that some of the bigger challenges of the modern world were just not being addressed by the quite complex sort of planning and delivery structures that exist in the region. I think land use is definitely one of those, but there are others too. And the reason that really matters is with the government as it is at the moment, you know, the Southeast gets caricatured as fat and happy, basically, you know, successful, fine, you know, and you have some quite difficult challenges. You know, how could we ever justify investment in Surrey and Sussex before investment in Yorkshire, Humberside and Merseyside? Real challenge for us with a government that's been elected to rebalance, to level up. You know, if we're not careful, there's an explicit agenda there that deprioritises us. So we were trying to articulate ourselves within that, and we felt that some of the structural challenges were clear. You know, number one, an over dependence on commuting to earn money, particularly commuting to London. 1 in 10 people commute to London. They tend to be better qualified. They certainly earn more than people who work in the local area. Within the local area, an over-reliance on Gatwick and the businesses around Gatwick. You know, that in Gatwick Airport, Gatwick Diamond, Crawley, Manor Royal, Red Hill, you know, we have a genuine commercial hub. We just don't have as many commercial hubs elsewhere. And I think a real concern that the quality of our towns was starting to fade, you know, in a competitive labour market where skills are at a premium, private sector investments at a premium. You know, just how could we attract businesses to our towns? That's not a Brighton issue. I think Brighton, you know, has a real standout attractiveness on an international level. But I'm afraid, without being at all rude to anyone, you know, it's just not true of Horsham or East Grinstead or Haywards Heath in the way that it probably was 20 or 30 years ago. So you can see the life sort of getting sucked away from the region a bit more. It's too expensive to live. House price multiples were the most expensive in the country in 2018 when the government produced its white paper, and it's got even worse since then. When you look at it, we actually can see that starting to feed through to the demographics of the region. So when you look at our population pyramid, we've got fewer 20-somethings and 30-somethings than we ought to have. That's a real worry because lots of regions are getting older, but most regions retain a younger working graduate population. We don't, you know, our young people go away to university and don't come back. And those that come to Sussex and Brighton tend not to stay because they can't afford to. And that's not a sustainable basis to build a regional economy. So we were describing the region as being, you know, atypical of the Southeast, in need of support and in need of investment. And I hope that makes sense to you. And we've got evidence to prove it. I mean, that's not me saying it, we have evidence to prove it. We submitted our 250-page analysis to government. We got ringing endorsement from government, and we set out some ideas on how to address those things. And then COVID happened, and COVID is really, really, really difficult for the region. The region is disproportionately affected by COVID. I mean, to be really clear about that, you know, it's a challenge for the whole country, but it's sort of designed to tackle, it preys on the weaknesses that I just articulated for you. So this reliance on Gatwick and the Gatwick economy is really brought home to roost by what COVID has done. Alison's here, so I won't try and you know, summarise too much her business, but you know, Gatwick passenger numbers are really threatened. The employment base of the airport is really threatened. The airport's saying it'll take 4 to 5 years to go back to 2019 levels. The DfT prediction for aviation on a national level is slightly more bleak than that. They're saying 5 to 10 years. So it shows that we've got a strong airport, a strong regional airport, one of the country's real assets. But you know, being absolutely no doubt that there's very significant disruption in terms of unemployment and the impact on the supply chain, and just the simple fact that Gatwick's capital investment programme, which used to be £250 million a year, much of it going into our local economy, won't be there for quite a long period. So, you know, we have a huge challenge there. And then we had a huge challenge across the rest of the region too, because so much of our economy was based on service industries, you know, on retail, on tourism, on people going out and about. You know, the regional economy that we'd built was based on people feeling good, with money to spend, going around spending it on all of our SMEs across the area. Now, the summer has proved to be reasonably good, I think, from a very, very difficult start. Brighton and the coast had a good summer. I think Sussex has done pretty well. Surrey, I'm not quite so sure about, but, you know, actually it wasn't looking so bad. We'll have to wait and see what happens subsequently, because we haven't yet seen the unemployment figures. Furlough's still there. We don't know quite how big the problem will be, but our projections as the LEP are that it'll be somewhere between a 12% and 17% reduction in GVA this year. So that's sort of off the scale by historic standards. And that's assuming no second lockdown. If there is a second lockdown, it'll be somewhere in the 20s. So even if you just take that as a starting number, you know, obviously the impact of that will vary from place to place. The impact of that, you know, is likely to be felt acutely in Crawley. It's likely to be felt very significantly in the other towns of the Gatwick Diamond, because so many jobs rely on the airport continuing to thrive. There's a large level of uncertainty about what will happen to the London labour market. Many of our people commute to London. And, you know, some people are optimistic about the kind of work from home economy happening. I see many of us are working from home. I'm working from home in Croydon at the moment. You know, I think that's all very good, so long as London employers are prepared to keep people on a working from home basis. My personal view is that it's a little bit naive to assume that everyone will just work from home indefinitely. Even if we do, I'm not sure that benefits our local economies particularly. I mean, I'm working in my back bedroom for 10 hours a day. I'm not going around spending lots of money in my local businesses, and I'm sure that's true for all of you as well. So I think we need, if working from home is the medium-term future for the region, we need to see our towns and places sort of adapt to that and try and generate an economy that's based on it. A back bedroom economy doesn't necessarily add much to particular towns. So COVID is a huge challenge, and given that the government was elected on a manifesto of favouring the North and favouring the Midlands, you know, we do have a real job on our hands to get these messages across to ministers. So what I'll be unveiling at the AGM next week, and I really would commend the AGM to you, is our vision for this, which we've discussed with our region's MPs, and we have had a positive reaction from them. Basically, what we need to do is set out, excuse me one second, we need to set out a really simple manifesto for what does the region's economy need going forward. No, we can't be seen as the fat and happy South. We can't be seen as the you know, the area that they can overlook. So we're saying growth in our area needs to be stronger, smarter, and greener. That's our triptych. You know, growth in coastal capital area, stronger, smarter, greener, and we can apply that to the growth areas of the region. So in the Gatwick Diamond, it's about stronger growth. Okay, it's about explicit identification of Gatwick Airport and the towns around Gatwick Airport and the business space around Gatwick Airport, the business community around Gatwick Airport, as an area that needs public investment to deepen its roots in the regional economy. We want the region to see, we want this sort of sub-region to be seen as one of the drivers of the UK's growth over the next 20 years, because it will be a platform for international investment and exporting. But in order to do that, we have to diversify, not just supporting a strong aviation sector, which we've always done really, really well, but also creating an environment where other businesses that are going to thrive for the next 50 years take root. Now, that means a real focus on local plans, local authorities, local plans. It means a real focus on delivering the things that local authorities want in their plans. It means prioritising house building. It means prioritising building more commercial development, more business space, adapting that business space to the needs of this future economy. If that's working from home or working more flexibly, I don't know. It means public investment. We would like to see the government in its planning white paper, it talks about growth zones and protected zones and this, that and the other zones. You know, we'd like to see an explicit endorsement of the right growth zone around our area. I'm not saying what that shape should be because, you know, I'm not a planner and there's a planning context to take into account, but we certainly see very significant potential with the airport at the heart of it. And the airport's going through a difficult period, but it will bounce back. It will continue to grow. Air travel is fundamental to the success of global trade, and it's fundamental to our region, and we have to embrace that and support the airport. But also we've got to bring more businesses in, bring more skilled businesses in, make this one of the premier business locations in the country. So we've had early success on this. We've got £8.2 million just in July from the government to invest in an innovation centre in Crawley, which we're doing with partners in Manor Royal. And the point of an innovation centre is you fast track the growth of business space that's going to attract a supply chain into the Manor Royal businesses. So, you know, on Manor Royal, we've got some great companies. We've got people like Thales, Electa, and others. Elsewhere in the Gatwick Diamond, we've got other world-class businesses. Down in Brighton, we've got world-class businesses. What they're all saying to us is, frankly, the quality of the business environment in Crawley isn't good enough, and it's not working well enough to bring our to bring forward their supply chain. You know, if you take Thales, for example, their supply chain it's got more in France than it has in Sussex. It's got more in Copenhagen than it has in Sussex. You know, they need to create an environment where skills of the future, which are all about tech skills, they're all about systems engineering, they're all about, you know, kind of IT, CDIT skills, come naturally to our area. So our innovation centre is going to do that. And then beyond that, we need investment in our infrastructure. We need investment in the sorts of big developments that the local authorities have planned. There's big developments planned in Horsham, in Burgess Hill, in Hawley and elsewhere. And we need that fast tracked because that brings jobs and it brings wealth and it brings investment. I think in a nutshell, we want the government to talk about Gatwick and the towns around it, not just as an airport with commuter towns, but as a kind of a commercial centre, a bit like these HS2 stations that are springing up around the country, you know, where that you talk about the HS2 station, not just as a railway station, but as the basis for growth and investment in the area. That's what our place should be. So that's our vision for the Gatwick Diamond. Down in Brighton and on the coast, it's about smarter growth. Okay, so there's limited capacity for growth down there because so much land will be protected. But what Brighton and the coast does is it's our gateway to research and innovation. It's our gateway to tech development. And Brighton's had a 5G industry, for example, for the last 5 years. You know, the rest of the country is still talking about 5G as if it's a new thing. We've had a 5G centre next to the station, working with the universities for years already. I've done this job for nearly 5 years, and it was in place when I arrived. We need to actually start to make that a real thing and really fast track the development of the technologies. The next big thing coming out of Sussex University is quantum tech. We've got a quantum research centre in Sussex that you don't find anywhere else in the country, in the world, actually. So we need to get investment from government to bring these sectors forward, and we need to capitalise on what Brighton's good at, which is its tech sector, its entrepreneurs, its growth industries, and really bring that forward. And then, of course, as Brighton grows, it grows along the coast, and you know, Shoreham is changing already. Bognar's got big ambitions. Got Chichester University too, Lancing Business Park. You know, really interesting businesses down there. We need to see them start to grow. And we've kind of been saying this for years, but you know, in a context where the economy is going to shrink by 12 to 17%, we will be materially poorer unless we can increase our growth rates. You know, growth rates of 2 to 3% a year means it will take about a decade to get back to where we were last year. That's what we've got to bear in mind. So we've got to fast track the growth of growth sectors. And the third pillar is cleaner growth, greener growth, which, you know, is vital because climate change is a huge challenge to the area. And you know, non-clean growth just isn't relevant, is it, going forward? It's got to be cleaner. Otherwise, it's just not good enough. So we're in a really good position to deal with that. And we need to get this better known by government. So, you know, we've got sectors that are best in class in terms of green growth. Gatwick itself is best in class in the aviation sector in terms of green growth. And you can talk about the buses. We've got hydrogen buses in the Gatwick Diamond now and in Brighton. You know, we're the first place in the country to do that. We've got fantastic plans for the building stock, for the, you know, all these new investments that are coming forward in the business parks I've just described. They are green in their own right, and we need to make a real virtue of that. We've got offsetting plans that are really, really interesting. So there's a really, really interesting story about natural capital offsetting in the region with the nature partnerships in Surrey and Sussex. You know, really, really fundamental stuff there that we can be best in class at for the country. And of course, we've got sectors in our economy that are very attuned to the green story, as well as the tech sector that I've talked about. We've got the wine sector, which is on the up because of climate change. We've got the glasshouse sector, which, you know, works much on much the same principle. It's actually a net contributor to the national grid because they generate so much power from their glasshouses. They put more into the national grid than they take out. You've got tourism, which will be a huge growth sector for the region. But the point is, and our message to government is, you know, if we are going to recover from this acute contraction of our economy, we actually need support for these businesses. So, you know, we need a quantum investment fund to bring the quantum sector forward. We need to look at our wine sector, and rather than it being something that we're just sort of toying with and enjoying having in the region, we need to talk about making it a growth sector that will deliver jobs, a bit like they've done in New Zealand, a bit like they've done in France for 200 years, a bit like they do in all across the Western world. And I think there's something very Sussex and Surrey about this, you know, kind of we're portrayed as fat and happy because we just like the idea of living in an affluent area with high house prices. You know, what the contraction means is we've got to actually have the businesses to back that up. Otherwise, we're going to face really significant challenges in unemployment and all the woes that come with that, which we're not used to. So we've got to do something. Otherwise, it's going to be really difficult. So that's our pitch. The MPs liked it. We like it. The board likes it. Local partners are on side. Talked to our leaders last week. And the difficult thing is actually voicing it and meaning it. So we're going to government now with a pitch for the investment that we need to back that up. So the first step is investment in infrastructure. I can't emphasize that highly enough. You know, this is not a big city economy that's just going to grow naturally. It's an economy of towns that needs investment to join them together. So it needs investment in the railways, investment in sustainable transport, investment in fibre above all, investment in the things that hold it together. and it needs investment in the projects that I've outlined. So we have a pitch, which I'll be unveiling at the AGM. We'll be pitching it to the government. There'll be a budget this year. We'll get our MPs on side, and hopefully our businesses supporting us too. And, you know, every region will suffer from COVID, and obviously the government's got significant plans for the country as a whole, and I'll be the first to support that and not underestimate how difficult it is. But unless we can start to talk about our region specifically, we're going to materially slip back from what we've been used to. So it feels really quite urgent and important. I hope that helps. It's really hard giving this presentation, let alone on Zoom, to strike a balance between negative and positive. So I don't want you to think that I'm negative about this, all right? I think the region has got huge potential, and there's no reason to think we can't grow. You know, we're a successful, entrepreneurial, productive region that has had full employment for 20 years. We are going to go through a patch where we don't have full employment, and the challenge is to make the plans now so we come out of that with a sustainable basis for growth. So I'm really optimistic we can do that. The role of the LEP is to provide leadership to that, but you know, we absolutely rely on working closely with all of you, with our local authorities, with our politicians to do it, and it'll be really good to get some feedback and see what you think. Thanks.
Thank you, Jonathan. Thank you, Jonathan. That's really excellent. So I think I'll throw it straight open. Don't think it has to be a sort of a direct question. You know, a contribution from your perspective is fine, but I know Jonathan is also very pleased and capable of taking direct and difficult questions as well. So over to you. Who'd like to go first? Just wave at me, shout at me, stick your hand up. I've never seen you all so quiet. David, I've got David, and then I've got Jeremy Taylor. So I've got two anyway. Otherwise I'll start picking on people, which I'm good at. Right, David, you go first.
Okay, thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jonathan, for that heads up. Can I ask a question about you mentioned about the sustainable transport policy. Can you tell us a little bit more? Because obviously I'm one of the people that used to do the old from down here near the other side of Worthing, 2-hour commute up to London and back every day. Once you actually obviously get into where you need to be in London. Is there any discussion going on with government around, I know there must be something, but what's the discussion around making this more sustainable rather than this sort of crazy idea of everyone running up there and everyone running back repeatedly? Thanks, David.
So transport's hugely important to the region, and you know, not least Gatwick. Where to start? I mean, so much has changed in COVID, hasn't it? That what we all understood to be the previous challenge, transport challenge, might have just disappeared because of COVID. Personally, I don't think it will. I think commuting will return, but at the moment, the train passenger levels are fascinating. You know, if you look at the southern network as a whole, on the busiest day since over the last 6 months, the very busiest day on that network has been the same as a quiet Sunday in February. So, you know, the demand for commuting up to London, the demand for travelling to the airport by train, and all those routes that previously were hugely busy is much, much lower than it used to be. But if you dig a bit deeper, you can see in some places the railways sprung back to exactly what it was before lockdown. So particularly the routes into Brighton, that little train that runs along the coast, and some of the local services, you know, they're as busy summer 2020 as they were summer 19. So you can see that when the economy comes back, and Brighton's had a good summer, as I said, you know, it immediately comes back in railway terms too. By and large, travel across the region is getting back to what it was, but it's more about leisure travel and shopping travel than it is about work travel. So when we look at the car stats, you know, it's particularly buoyant in West Sussex, a bit less so in Surrey and Brighton, but it's coming back. I think, you know, so much of the growth across the whole economy needs to be more sustainable going forward because of the importance of climate. And what the government appears to be saying is that, you know, they want people to use more sustainable routes of travel because they're safe. And we're still going through that transition because a lot of people don't believe they're safe, so they're staying off public transport, and a lot of people would rather drive. But my own view is that there'll be quite a lot of change in favour of sustainable transport. I mean, what happens to the rail franchises is the first question. Will the government nationalise the railways? Just don't know. What happens to railway investment? I think that's really important. You know, we've got a whole new station coming through at Gatwick. That work's underway. If you go through Gatwick on the train, you can see it happening. So it's going to be a massive, brand new state-of-the-art railway station at Gatwick Airport to serve a growing airport and to serve the local economy. So that's just as good as they're getting anywhere else in the country, and we need to make the best of that. And then the next big step is, for about 5 years now, we've been developing a major investment in Croydon, which is in Croydon, but it benefits the whole railway. So that will bring about 20% more capacity to our railways. And actually within that, you get loads of opportunities. You know, with 20% more capacity, it might be more trains to London, or it might be more trains into, you know, we might have this capacity to create a new service pattern where Crawley becomes a growth hub. You know, as our towns change, maybe if the towns change, you get more jobs in the towns, you can have more train services between the towns. My personal view is that, you know, road building may happen, but I'd be surprised if major large-scale road building ever happened again in this country. It's much more likely to be railway and sustainable based than it is roads. But it's a bit of crystal ball gazing there, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, thanks.
Just to follow up to that, Jonathan, you emphasise the importance of investment in infrastructure. And then you've just described, you know, what's happening currently in terms of numbers of people using trains, for example, with some exceptions. Is there a real danger, actually, that essential infrastructure investment is actually going to be put off because people are going to say we don't need it anymore? Which is, I feel, is a very short-term view.
Yes.
You have something of a challenge in overcoming that.
I don't think it will, Jeff. I think you have to look at sort of the importance of government in this. You know, infrastructure, although it's often delivered by private sector, and Gatwick's probably one of the best examples of this in the country, it does require government to set the right framework for it. And for the Chancellor, you know, looking at huge unemployment challenge across the whole country, he'll want to do everything he can. And actually, infrastructure is one of the few things that government can do. So it wouldn't surprise me if government spent billions on infrastructure soon. It provides jobs. You know, you get the construction industry moving. You build the British infrastructure to last 100 years. The question is he going to spend it in this area? I think, you know, it's much more likely that they're attracted to building the Grimsby bypass, or, you know, the high-speed rail between Hartlepool and Sunderland or something. You know, I mean, we need to be really clear that infrastructure is needed in our region. And I think the same is true for housing and business space. You know, that's another great way for jobs to be created and money to go into people's pockets. So we need to articulate. I think the most important infrastructure for us is transport's really important, and fibre infrastructure is the other thing that really matters. And, you know, a lot of places talk about fibre as if it's a future thing. You know, as I said, Brighton's had a tech sector ahead of its time for 5 years or so. West Sussex has now got a fibre network that's amongst the best in the country because the local authorities have been excellent at laying fibre. The next step is to do that in Surrey too. Surrey's a little bit behind, and to link it all together. So, you know, why wouldn't we have a 5G economy before everyone else? We've got the fibre infrastructure. We need to get on and do it. And so, you know, I think a lot of the intervention we want to make is about unlocking that and trying to capture the future a bit more.
Okay, thank you. Jeremy Taylor, I think you were next.
Lovely, thanks. Hello, Jonathan. It's a quick question. It sort of relates a bit to what David was saying, talking about transport, but I was just wondering how open and engaged are EM3 and CELEP, our neighbouring LEPs, to working collectively, because obviously the collective is always stronger than the individual, just as if Crawley works with the Gatwick Diamond, if Gatwick Diamond works with Coastal Capital, and then if the LEP works across the piece, that's only going to help. But also the other piece is a lot of the corridors historically are north-south, but actually if we see local transport, and I think this is reflected in the way that the bus use has gone faster than train use, and you were talking about coastal routes which are sort of short journeys, because people feel more comfortable with short journeys. Do you think we can see something happening better to improve east-west transport links. So two questions: how engaged are the neighbouring LEPs, and what can we do to improve east-west links to open up employment as well?
So we've got a great handle on transport at the highest level. There's this thing called TFSE, Transport for the South East. So all transport priorities are established through TFSE. So what I say about transport reflects the TFSE priority view, and what they say for, I mean, it includes Berkshire, Solent and the Isle of Wight, right the way along to Kent. So it's a big slab of the country, and they've put a lot of work and a lot of money actually into working out what's the best, how do you get the best bang for your buck. So you're talking there about the Brighton Main Line at Croydon, you're talking about the right investments on the M23, you're talking about the A27. I think those are really well established as priority projects. So we are all singing from the same hymn sheet. Collaboration with other LEPs, we've really made great progress over lockdown. Lockdown's been great for productivity in many ways. So we've spent a lot of quality time together on Zoom as LEPs. We've come up with government's been giving us a really hard time saying, the South East comes across as not getting its act together, because you've got the Northern Powerhouse, you've got the Midlands Engine, you've got the West of England Gateway, you've got the Oxford to Cambridge Arc, you've got all these business-led brands that, Oxford to Cambridge Arc, for example, you sort of understand what that is, don't you? It links the two global universities together and makes stuff happen along that corridor, and it allows them to focus on the region without worrying too much about the 250 local authorities that exist between Oxford and Cambridge and how you do it. So our response to that has been it's called Catalyst South, and it is a group of LEPs that covers the clock face around London, apart from Oxfordshire and Buckinghamshire. So it's everyone from Essex and Hertfordshire around to the Solent and Berkshire. And what we're doing there is explaining why our economy matters on a national basis. It's about international gateways, it's about investment, it's about jobs, it's about London's workforce, it's about a high-tech, high-spec economy, which is just as true in Sussex and Surrey as it is in Berkshire and Southampton and the Thames Estuary. So that's been received really, really well. And we have a discussion with the Minister next week about that. And I think, we'll see where that goes. So that's above what Coastal Capital's doing, if you like.
Thank you. Who'd like to go next? Anybody waving at me? Yes, sorry, Tony, you're right on the bottom of my screen. But
That's all right. Save the best till last. I was just going to pick up on this idea of government not wanting to be seen to support the South East, given its sort of levelling up platform. I mean, it has done some U-turns, so it could U-turn on that one. But just from our point of view, we come across this a lot in tackling disadvantage, that everyone assumes there is no disadvantage in the South East. And I'm just wondering if there's more that we can all do to help change that message while still remaining positive about the offer of our region to help the national economy. Whether there's, I suppose, the PR side of that we can all play a part in.
Yes, I mean, I don't think we'll ever win that argument on a national basis, because visibly, we are not deprived in the way that Teesside or Merseyside or rural Cumbria are, and so I think a large part of it is avoiding the trap that the South East can tend to fall into of appearing entitled. We're not entitled to anything. And part of the government's sort of election manifesto was to try and engage that frustration in the north, and they won, and so therefore they will want to pursue that. But my view is, I think you're absolutely right. We need to articulate what we need in a more sophisticated way, which is basically, if you don't invest in this area and make the right decisions in this area, then you can't bank on the South East continuing to grow and support the national economy. And of course, if you are trying to rebalance the national economy, you need some regions to be net contributors, and we're one of those, as well as some regions being net beneficiaries. No one benefits if the City of London dies, for example, just like no one benefits if the South East economy dies. I also happen to think that, unfortunately, in the next year to 2 years, we're going to see some real hardship and challenges in our area. I think Crawley is extremely vulnerable to what's going to happen. The Centre for Cities did a study earlier in lockdown. They found Crawley was the most exposed place to jobs. 80% of jobs held by people from Crawley were felt to be either vulnerable or extremely vulnerable to the challenge. And so, you know, lower skilled populations, younger populations, people who are, you know, from minority communities outside the mainstream are going to really find a big challenge. And it's incumbent on all of us to sort of realise that, and realise the next few years are going to be very different to the last few years, I think. But having said that, we've got a lot of capacity to respond. The airport will come back, new businesses will come in, skills can be learned, skills can be improved. People are there to be helped. The voluntary sector's got a big role, businesses have got a big role. You know, just because it's never happened before doesn't mean that it's the end of the world. It means we've got to sort of take it in our stride and make a success of it, really. And what I see from the politicians and the businesses is a real recognition of that. So I do feel optimistic about it.
Alison.
Yeah, I just wanted to follow up on that, actually, because as you say, Jonathan, that, you know, obviously the airport, we know that we're going to recover the airport's passenger numbers back up to pre-COVID levels, to 2019 levels, but it's going to take 4 or 5 years potentially. But also we know that that growth over the next 5 years is going to be in a completely different context to the growth that we've seen at Gatwick over the last 10 years, say. So actually there's a really big opportunity for us. I mean, and this is the same for a lot of businesses actually, in looking at our sort of growth and recovery plans, is in that new context actually say, so what do we do, you know, all the things that we've learned over the last 10 years in terms of our efficiencies and everything else, yes, we bring that forward, but actually how do we need to work differently? What are our new priorities in order to be part of this sort of new imperative that you've described? And potentially, you know, we'll have to focus on different things as we go forward. And I think that's the same with a lot of, you know, businesses across the region. It's actually not just trying to sort of recover back to the sort of business you were running before, but it's actually having a new model almost, and new priorities. So yeah, just reflecting on that.
Okay. We've got Nigel and Kate. Just before Nigel and Kate come in, I just want to make a sort of a comment myself. I'm getting a little bit worried recently because I hear people talking about over-reliance on aviation and the airport. And it depends how you put it, of course. You know, aviation and the airport are key assets, and any business wants to maximize the return from its key assets. And we need to do that as a region. But we also need to build up new assets as well. And that's how you get your balance. You don't get your balance by holding back your key asset. And I'm a bit concerned, this is just an observation, Jonathan, you don't need to respond to it. People are turning things around and saying the airport and the aviation sector is the problem.
Yeah.
Actually, it's a big part of the solution. So if you'd like to comment on that, otherwise I will go to Nigel and Kate.
I would like to comment on that, actually. I do strongly agree with you. I think we've probably been more over-reliant on retail and more over-reliant on hospitality and leisure, because those sectors have provided large numbers of low-skill entry jobs for people. And actually, they're going to be far less resilient than the airport over the next 5 to 10 years. You know, we've got the real prospect of high streets looking utterly different, being completely decimated if it goes badly wrong. And I think the biggest issue for us as a business community here is having a diverse economy where high skill, high pay jobs are easier to find. You know, we've become more dependent on commuting to London than we should have been, and we've been more dependent on retail and other things at the lower skill end of the spectrum. Now, the biggest challenge for us is changing the nature of our places so that high paid, high skill, larger companies are naturally based in this area, a bit like they have in Reading, in Milton Keynes, in Cambridge, in Southampton, in Bristol, in Guildford, Canterbury. You know, I mean, there's something about this area where people have been happy with it as it's been for 30 years, you know, and we've been happy with having a smaller number of large employers and a lot of micro businesses. But we also need to provide an environment where the micro businesses can grow and the small businesses can grow, because then you get more opportunities for graduates, you get more training, you get more apprenticeships, you get more skills. At the end of the day, 20 and 30 somethings have been leaving this region for years because they can't afford to live here, and that's the fundamental thing we need to address. And the airport is a great way of addressing it,
Yeah, absolutely.
as well as other growth sectors. That's the challenge.
Thanks. That probably leads us well into Nigel.
Actually, it does. It's a very, very relevant point. I was going to ask, really. So, Jonathan, the way you kind of set out the strategy, if you like, or the aspiration at the beginning of the call is really interesting, and I completely support it. It makes perfect sense. But I guess just when we consider kind of the tone from government is that, you know, they're not really minded to help us out or to give into a special case for the Southeast, and they are more than likely going to invest further north. Should we be kind of switching some of that emphasis much more towards celebrating the success and kind of trying to attract business and say, actually, we're really good at all this stuff, rather than trying to make the special case for where the areas of if you like, where less strong are? And it's very hard to get the balance right between saying we need investment for a special case, but by the way, we're really brilliant. I'm just wondering, is there a balance in that to get right?
I mean, that's good feedback. I hope the balance is a bit better when I give the presentation with slides at the AGM, because I'm doing it blind here. But actually, if you remember the pitch for stronger growth around Gatwick, where our pitch is and this is the Gatwick Diamond, so Gatwick and the towns around it should be a national commercial centre with unparalleled global access, and, you know, the pre-ingredients, including more workspace and more housing for people to want to move here and live here. And down in Brighton, it's about smarter growth, where, you know, Brighton will change less, but we need more support for these growing tech sectors, which frankly you won't find anywhere else in the country. You know, I mean, there is, Elon Musk has invested in the Brighton quantum startup. And that's a Brighton quantum startup. It doesn't exist in Hull or Grimsby or Sunderland. You know, it's a Brighton thing, and it needs to be seen and celebrated as such. So you're absolutely right. We've got to sell ourselves with confidence, but also we've got to be aware of the challenges. And I think one of the things I wrestle with in this job is, you know, because we're terribly polite in the Southeast, is that people don't always talk about things that aren't going well. The North's a master at it. Everything goes. I mean, you know, last time I went to Harrogate, it was a really nice, beautiful place. Everyone seemed very rich, and yet, you know, the stereotype of the North is that it really needs help. I think they've done it really well, and we can learn something from that.
We need more whippets and black pudding, really, don't we? That'll get us there. Right, Kate, I think you had your hand up a little while ago.
Yeah, thanks. I'm Kate. I'm from the University of Sussex. And we fully support enhancing fibre in our region, and also I'm really pleased to see that in your strategy you're going to be defining our USP as a region, and some of those themes absolutely Sussex is sort of, and the other universities in our region can really help build that USP so that we have a really, really strong offer. So that's really exciting, and I can't wait to hear more about that. I've just had a question for you. Just before we sort of went into lockdown, I was starting to meet companies and sort of thinking, oh, is this a trend that's going on here? Who deciding to have a front door in London, but their main base in our Gatwick corridor. And this was particularly with fintech companies that I was doing some work with. And I wondered, first of all, had you also identified that trend? Because I think, you know, establishing ourselves as somewhere with a USP for strength in tech will help more of that happen. And also post-COVID, do you think that the possibility for people wanting to stay local in case of local lockdowns, so work where they live, so these sort of having large bases that are out of the city centre where computer programmers or whoever it might be are based, that might help sort of spur on that trend that might have been happening before the lockdowns started?
Very good question. Yes, I was seeing it. but actually a lot of the companies I was talking to were almost apologising for it. A number of them were saying that they would rather be wholly based in the region without the need to have a London presence, because it's expensive, was expensive to have a London presence. So, you know, that goes back to the point I was making about the perceived quality of our places. A good example of this, I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying, is Ricardo, which is a Shoreham-based company, really successful engineering automobile company. They were saying they couldn't attract graduates to Shoreham. You know, what PhD student coming out of the University of wherever would want to move to Shoreham? They wanted to live in London. So Ricardo were required to have a London presence in order to attract their highest skilled UK workforce. Now that's just selling ourselves massively short, frankly, you know. And quite a lot of the businesses in the region have a London office, you know, and it's fine if it's just a front, but it's a bit of a worry if their chief executive starts to be based there and the senior management team and the graduates and everything else, because we're just left doing the less well-paid jobs. So I don't see it as a good thing. I think if we can reverse it, that would be great. And great news, you know, just as lockdown was starting, I think it's Hyundai have announced they're moving to Leatherhead, and, you know, different companies moving into the region. I think Virgin are keeping their HQ in Crawley, or what's left of their HQ, you know, in spite of the challenges that they're going through. So we need to be companies to be based here and proud of it, like Amex are in Brighton. In terms of lockdown, I mean, as I said before, I'm a bit more sceptical about what will happen. You know, if London suffers, if businesses leave London, then our region needs to get its act together and provide facilities that would entice them to work here. You know, because I think there'll be a queue of ambitious towns and cities that will say to the city firms, you know, why don't you move here? Not least Birmingham. You know, HS2 means that Birmingham is 45 minutes from London. So that's closer than Reigate. You know, why would businesses move to Reigate when they can move to Birmingham? Sorry, Simon. And we need to recognise that these things don't happen by accident. They happen because you build bespoke, tailored, subsidised things. You welcome the businesses. And I think this region has always been really ambivalent about growth and development. And you know, the airport debate illustrates that more than anything. People are happy to slag the airport off until it's not there anymore. And then it's a real problem. So we've got to get much better at that and recognise we'll be in competition with other areas. And that's why we're really, really keen on talking about the Gatwick Diamond as a commercial hub, supporting these local plans, getting investment in the infrastructure, bringing forward West of Ifield, bringing forward the Hawley Business Park, bringing forward the Burgess Hill Science Park at speed, and bringing forward other developments that might not have planning permission yet, and just really kind of, you know, making it happen. That's what we need to do.
Thanks, John. Sticking to that theme, Ross and Sally, I know you're both sort of heavily involved in a different way in the sort of development side and in terms of improving our offer, because you know, the way out of where we are now is business investment, whether it's from our indigenous businesses or providing the right offer for new businesses to come in. And I just wondered, Ross, I know, for example, you've been working very hard with the likes of London and Croydon, and whether you had any perceptions on what we need to do to sell ourselves, because just saying we've got the lovely Surrey Hills or the South Downs isn't enough. At least that's my view. What's your perception of that?
Sure. Well, I mean, one of the things we've been talking about quite a lot is the 20 and 30 somethings leaving, and that's a problem in that story, because one of the key things that makes businesses want to locate somewhere is the available talent pool. Now, allied to that, we've got a situation where a lot of our employment, particularly in the Gatwick Diamond area, has been related to aviation and the airport. And those are skills which may not be needed in quite the same numbers as they are in the future. So we'll have an older workforce lacking the skills for any replacement industries that we might seek to attract. So there is a real talent issue. It's good to see universities on the call. So, you know, we need to work with them to see what we can do to retain the talent that trains at them and keep it in the area so that we can be an attractive place for people. Jonathan, you talked a bit about people are leaving because they can't afford to live around here. We need to change that dynamic. There needs to be a significant uplift in affordable homes close to workplaces, that's a planning issue, obviously, and I know you were steering clear of that, but it's something that you're going to need to address. Jeremy, you talked about east-west connectivity. That's another thing that would assist in businesses wanting to locate, because especially somewhere like Crawley, where I've forgotten the number, 40% of Crawley workers commute into the town, I think, and that, if that's all by private car, which a lot of it is at the moment, then that's kind of unsustainable in all senses of the word. I know several people who rather unbelievably commute from Guildford to Crawley for their work, and you think, well, firstly, why? Secondly, how horrible, and thirdly, why isn't there someone living in Crawley that can do that job? So all of those things are quite linked. We have, there is another part of that equation, which is land use and available land for appropriate business space. We've got a lot of business space. Is it the right stuff? Are we trying to attract the right kinds of companies to the right sort of accommodation? And is that changing? You talk about our towns. Are the towns appropriate places for business? Do they have the appropriate business space in them? There's been huge demand where you're based, Jeff, for those sorts of small cellular office type accommodation. That could grow significantly now. Although I was talking to a co-working provider the other day who thought that co-working spaces in locations like Crawley were about to go through a real boom, because companies with bases in bigger urban centres want to have touchdown accommodation for their staff so that they can get a working from office experience without the commute.
Yeah.
So there's a whole load of questions. They've all become much more complicated, but I think probably the one that we can attack the most is the talent one, and having a really good talent story is absolutely essential when going out to the investment market.
I do agree with Ross. May I just add one other thing? And I think the last thing we should talk about is the beautiful countryside. Frankly, I think everyone's there. They've got beautiful countryside, and no one's interested. I think, as well as education, the other thing we just need to be aware of is culture in our places. People live in Guildford and drive 50 miles to Crawley every day because Guildford's got a nightlife and a cultural offer, and all these things. And I think across all of our towns, apart from Brighton, which does it really well, we do need to think about what is the draw. Why would people want to live in Shoreham rather than in Guildford? And until we crack that, we're just gonna just be perceived in a more negative way. Thank you.
That's true, but I must object. How dare you put the Crawley nightlife down?
We've actually run out of time. And Sally, I just wanted to give you a quick opportunity, though. Ross has really emphasised the people side. I think it's people, but it's also a quality offer in terms of business premises and sites, and that's something that Wilkie are very actively involved in. Did you have any reflections on that in terms of the offer we make for businesses to invest?
I think that Ross is right. Talent is important, but equally the places in where that talent is going to work is vital. And Crawley, the Crawley-Gatwick area, is unfortunately very land constrained, and there is a part for Gatwick to play in that, I think, in terms of releasing safeguarded land, because without sites of scale, you are not going to be able to create the environment that people are wanting, which is much more campus style, more open spaces, And it's not just because of COVID, it's because people want to work in a quality environment. And I know that Steve Sawyer and the BID have been working really hard with some fantastic results at Manor Royal in trying to improve that, but it is key. And what Ross says about co-working and small cellular offices, I think is equally important. You know, big businesses are going to be more sort of hub and spoke set up, and you will find we're finding already for our business centres in outside Leatherhead and Guildford that we're filling vacancies that occurred very, very quickly with people who want a small 1 or 2 person office, and one will come in one day, one will come in another, and the hope is that one day they may be able to sit in the same office with impunity, but that may be a little way away, I think. Okay,
thanks, Sally. So just over to you to round up, Jonathan.
Very grateful for comments. It's been a really, really helpful discussion, and great value in having a group like this. Although I speak to many of you bilaterally, you know, to have the wider group is great. Big plug for the AGM next week. You get to see the slides as well, and then, you know, we'll need to work with all of you in terms of getting our message across to government and being successful. So thank you very much for attending.
Thanks a lot, Jonathan. That's been excellent. We've also got a range of sort of comments come up in the chat section, which we'll try and capture for you and let you have. So just, I think, a thanks and round of applause for Jonathan. Can't hear you, but never mind. It looks good. Okay.